Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Real Squabble.
Yeah,
We're not going to squabble very much today, Mike. I hope. I kind of think
I hope
taking a
not.
little detour. We're going to talk about somebody in this squabble wrote a book. Tell me a little bit about your book. It's Psychonics, Mind Over Matter.
Yeah, Psychonics, Mind Over Matter. I came up with the book, gosh, probably about 5 years ago. So it's been something that I've thought about and written and just worked on and doodled on because I do have a day job. Um, that was really born out of, I mean, honestly, it's hard to say because so many things influenced it. Um, I remember just walking and listening to William Lane Craig one time talking about God's omnipresence being everywhere, right? And I thought, well, what the heck does that mean that God can be everywhere, right? And he said that God is cognitively aware and locally active. And I thought, wow, that's mind blowing that God could do that. He could be cognitively aware of everything and locally active. And I thought, okay, what about prayer? How does prayer work with God? Or, I mean, obviously, we don't even have to speak in
So
order
this is
to talk to God. And there's lots of mind to mind, and that was like the birth of it. There's lots of mind to
right.
mind communication that goes on.
So you've actually you've gone into science fiction here.
Yeah.
And this isn't something that I'm familiar with, where you've blended faith and science fiction and atheism. I mean, you really
hmm
kind of put atheism and faith kind of facing each other in a mirror. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Well, certainly it's expressing a worldview, and I try not to be trite or, um, I try to be real about what it is people believe and don't believe. Express that within the context of a novel. And you're asking about psychonics, which people look at it immediately and they're like, "What the heck is psychonics?" And that is a portmanteau. They call it, if I'm saying that right, a portmanteau. It's a collision of two words: psychological bionics, right? So it gets into that mental aspect, that cognitive thing I was talking about with William Lane Craig. And then I move into a world of advanced artificial intelligence, right? Human enhancements. That our world is, and movies are talking about and thinking about that quite a bit now, and into those metaphysical mysteries that we're talking about, the spiritual mysteries of how the mind works, how we talk to God. When two or more gather together, it seems like we can get prayers up to God. And God, you go all the way back into time, into the Hebrew scriptures, and you see that God was speaking to prophets. He was speaking to people at various times in the Bible, and it was mind to mind communication. And this is where the root was. Okay, and I want to say this at the beginning, because there was a lot of people, as they read Psychonics or looked at Psychonics, they said, "Oh, you got that from Star Wars, or you got that from Stranger Things, or some movie or some book, Humans or Upload or whatever." And I was like, no, I really didn't. I never even read or looked at any of those movies or books until later. And it's interesting that, and I won't bore everyone here, but I'll put it on Facebook. There's an entire history that I've traced all the way back, like I said, to the ancient Hebrews, through Babylon mythology, up through, I guess it was the 18th century when the term telepathy was coined, right, into the 20th century, where I think terms like scion, out of psychology and things that deal with the invisible and the mind and that type of thing, started to be inculcated into science fiction. So there's a deep, rich history of that kind of fiction, the kind of fiction I'm writing. But there's a subtle difference in what it is that I'm writing, because in most of these books and movies, they believe that it is the brain that is doing it. But when I'm writing, I'm coming from the view of a Christian and as a dualist, a substance dualist. And that gets, that can bore people when you start talking about it. But those were some of my major influences in this book, Glenn, were from folks that endorsed it. Some guys like Dr. J.P. Moreland and Gary Habermas.
So talk a little bit about being a dualist. What is for those of us listening that may not be as familiar with that term?
Okay, so Moreland, he argues for substance dualism. There are good Christian people who have other various types of beliefs. I believe this is the strongest one, and I won't go into too much detail, or some of the listeners will start to drool. But it's the belief that the mind, and in this context, the mind is the soul, fundamentally different from the physical brain. So there's the dualism, right? You have the mind and you have the brain. So the soul and the brain, and it can't be reduced. The soul can't be reduced, or the mind can't be reduced to mere biochemical processes. Think of it, I forget who gives the analogy. It may be Moreland or it may be John Lennox, I'm not sure, but it talks about driving a car, right? So and early on, this gave me some this made me think more deeply about the soul too, because I have people that I come in contact with that have mental health issues, right? So I was wondering about how that related to them and their soul and their brain, and what was going on, and were they completely their brain, and how did that correlate to them potentially having a soul? So the analogy of a person being strapped inside of a car, driving down the road, and the speedometer not working correctly, or the window being darkened in some places, and I'm only seeing, the soul is in there and can know what is happening, but the reality changes because in the context of what they're seeing on the instrument panel. So the car is like the body. The soul is the person in the car. So sometimes this is the way I see it. A person with a mental health issue, or say even if you're on drugs or you're drunk, something like that, you're in the same car, but the instrument panels are goofing up on you. You're not seeing it right. And so that's the dualism in a nutshell. In a nutshell.
Thanks for not boring us. I appreciate that. Hey, when you when you're incorporating Christian values into science fiction, it can be kind of challenging, and my favorite go-to author for just doing Christianity and other genre, I immediately think of C.S. Lewis and the fantasies.
Yeah.
How were authors like that foremost in your brain when you were, because I think that one of the things I remember about C.S. Lewis is that he says, we don't need more writers writing about Christianity. We need more Christian authors writing.
Yeah, I think there's probably no one that C.S. Lewis hasn't touched, right? In his perspective on mythology and creativity, and Tolkien, of course. And there are people listening now that are far more, that they're more, have far greater expertise on that than I do. So, I mean, certainly that's in my mind. I read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe as a kid. But, if I'm going to track the trail of how I came about doing this, the first thing was my son said, yeah, a lot of people say they're going to write a book, but, there's a difference in saying it and doing it. So he dropped the gauntlet on me, and I just started jotting down some notes, thinking about the thing William Lane Craig said. I had some interest in mental health issues because everyone in my family has a master's degree in psychology and counseling, and working on a PhD in counseling. So I'm reading their papers, I'm hearing all this kind of stuff. But between what I heard from William Lane Craig and what I just told you about J.P. Moreland and some of the things, to me, this is very interesting too, because you can't understand what's happening in the book PSYCHONIX, Psychological Bionics, Mind Over Matter, unless you understand some of the thinking from J.P. Moreland and Gary Habermas. And I got to interview Gary Habermas here on The Real Squabble one time. Great guy. And he was one of my first philosophy teachers in the early 80s at Liberty University. It was Liberty Baptist College back then. But Habermas believes that near-death experiences provide a strong evidence for the soul, right? The soul's existence and its independence from the body. And there's a lot of evidential material out there from him and through the University of Virginia. In my estimation, really not, maybe not proving, but showing great solid evidence for the afterlife. So in this book, you're going to learn about life in the afterlife and the fact, and you'll read in some places that I say that death is not just, how do I say it? It's not a destination, really. Let me read the back of my book here. I forget sometimes even what I said. But, death was never far away, reflected former Green Beret Colonel Stephen Scott, remembering the many times he had faced its cold grasp. But now death isn't an adversary, it's a destination. Death can feel sad for us. It is sad. I mean, Jesus wept over Lazarus. We all get sad, but it's nice to know that there's life and there's life and there's life. There's life after life, right?
So you introduced our protagonist, or your protagonist, in there. Tell me about a little bit about his life. What happened that makes him our protagonist?
Okay, well, I'll give you, for folks that are listening here, they're going to get some backstory stuff, so that they can know that the character's name is Stephen Scott. My brother's name is Stephen Scott. He is in the medical field. I was in the service. He was in the service for a short period of time, but I drew a lot from his experiences and my experiences in the military and my knowledge of special forces, having worked with the Army quite a bit, as Glenn Wolf knows.
Yeah, and you are, by the way, we're not in the Army.
No, I was in the Air Force. I worked with the Army quite a bit, and now I live in Annapolis, Maryland, where I have to occasionally wear a Navy sweatsuit as camouflage. But Stephen Scott is the protagonist. He is a former retired special Green Beret Colonel. Okay. So I don't want to give away too much of the story, but he has some mental health issues of his own that are caused by war and the loss of an eye. And his brother is a neurologist, having gone through the medical field, and they discover this new transhuman mental enhancement. And Stephen Scott himself already has some innate abilities that are discovered, that are enhanced. There are some realms that are discovered that science doesn't know much about now, that lend credibility to immaterial substances. We have material things in the world, but we also I believe there are immaterial substances. And that is what the soul is. That is what God is. God is immaterial. So, that allows for God to have existed for eternity. And the fact that he doesn't change and he is immaterial. And that's a deeper question. You can go to reasonablefaith.com to explore that concept.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think that science fiction is a natural vehicle for exploring those kinds of philosophical and theological questions?
I think every genre is, quite frankly, Glenn. This is one that excites me. You have to write what you know from your experiences. What is it that, you go to Netflix or to, Amazon Prime, when it shows most watch, what pops up? right?
Yeah.
Are they all cowboy westerns? Are they romances? Is it a lot of sci-fi and political thrillers? For me, it's a lot of sci-fi and political thrillers. And you will see, because we're talking about my first book, which is PSYCHONIX, Mind Over Matter, and this is being published by Illative House Press. Dr. T.J. Gentry and Dr. Brian Chilton asked me to be a part of their team. I'm the first novelist to be published by Illative House Press, and they are taking off like a rocket ship, man. They've already got about 30 to 50 people lined up, other novelists knocking at their door. So look for good things, and pick up this book on Amazon.com, PSYCHONIX, Mind Over Matter. But back to the story, it's interesting because many things I drew from in the story, it talks about what Colonel Stephen Scott went through with his Green Beret training, but it flashes back to their childhood and kind of how they were treated. Dr. Mark Starr is his stepbrother, and their dad has a short fuse, and I say their mom has the matches. Right? So there's a lot of craziness that goes on. It shows that they start questioning reality. What is reality about? They love watching Star Trek. They get into the conversation, and they start being very interested in whether Data in Star Trek is sentient or not in that whole episode, and then whether or not their TV is sentient, and why something physical made of material made by a man can or can't be sentient, and what is consciousness about. And they don't express it in those ways, but they start to think about it, and that's kind of how it starts to develop in the first novel. So it's their life experiences, near-death experiences, and a picture of heaven, because they don't necessarily, some of the characters don't necessarily believe in heaven. It's just like reality is now. So nothing gets crammed down your throat in this novel, but you'll experience sort of what I believe it's my vision of what heaven is like. Dr. Leo Purser down at Liberty University read my descriptions of heaven and said it made him tear up. So I think they're quite beautiful. I've changed it. Glenn was, when I was self-publishing, Glenn bought my very first book. So thank you, Glenn. You got me.
Welcome.
Got me started.
I was looking for.
Yeah, but I will say, and there's a lot of you who supported me who got that very first self-published book. This is published. This is fully published by Illative House Press.
And it is not substantively, it is, but it is not the same book I have.
It is not. It is not. There's a lot of things that there are some similarities, but I made a lot of changes, a lot of new exciting changes. I took out what I felt were just some boring blah, blah, blah parts. It's part of the creative writing process. Those listening who are writers know that. They'll go back a year later and they go, why the heck? I don't even need those 10 pages. Let me get that out of there so the reader doesn't completely fall asleep. So, get a new copy. Tell your friends about it. And you get back to the question of why using science fiction or political thrillers. For this number one, I think God is creative. He made us creative, so we can express ourselves in creative ways. We can express His creation in creative ways, just like people did through the Renaissance, painting paintings. Like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. Why make a statue? Why make a painting? Why did Lamech, make so many beautiful aspects of the temple back in the Jewish days? God made us creative, and to be creative and to express whatever it is we are or do or enjoy to His glory. I do that. I'm a fan of reading Vince Flynn books and Lee Child and David Baldacci, Tom Clancy. People like that. If you enjoy those types of novels, you'll enjoy reading my first in a trilogy, PSYCHONIX, Mind Over Matter. It does have a love story aspect to it. Someone in the book does fall in love. It's a beautiful scene in one of the pictures, but there's some violence as well in the first. There's some violence as well in the first book. If you can hear my dog in the background,
I hear your dog in the background.
Yeah. He said, "What? That's the dog version of Amen, preach it, brother." Right there. See, but these people don't always know it. As a young person, you don't realize how you're being influenced. Honestly, a lot of people go through life not really realizing that everyone who writes something is coming from a particular culture or background or worldview. And if you go back and you even listen to Star Trek, you can tell that, this episode was written by an atheist or a skeptic or someone who didn't understand Christian theology at all. Or, you can tell that they had a subtle agenda, right? And you can see it through the years, how they will slowly bring something in. They bring it. I don't want to get all into this. Tim Stratton can talk to you more about, and Doug Grutias about, neo-Marxism. But we've had that long march through our institutions that has subtly and not so subtly taken over and influenced the minds of people. And it's even gotten into the church. I think it's the job of every Christian to preach the gospel, to be a testimony where they are without hitting people over the head. It's like, okay, Glenn says, you know what? I don't care about that. I don't want to talk about it. All right, we can still be friends. I'm not here we can squabble. That's what this show has been about. We can squabble and disagree, but at the end of it, I don't hate you because I disagree with you. But
absolutely, yeah.
But I write this book. It does have Christian overtones, but it expresses those Christian overtones and gives you some resources to think, okay, if nothing else, like Greg Kokel says, it puts a stone in your shoe, gives you something to think about. It moves into the second novel with a company called Soulutions, S-O-U-L, Soulutions, not solutions. And they grow into becoming more covert, working with the CIA. And it is a book that I promised to the Israel Collective. They gave me a 10-day trip to Israel, and I was all over the place. And I still have friends and colonels in the IDF that I talk to, and places that I've been, that are put into this book because they come up against a terrorist challenge that takes a different direction in the second book. It's not the typical type of terrorism. And Stephen Scott, with his bionic abilities and some of the new things that they've discovered, the evolution of bionics, because it kind of like takes you, how the telephone and TVs began. Now Stephen Scott bionics has developed, technology has developed even farther. Into the third novel that I'm writing right now, it's called PSYCHONIX Utopia. It's a dystopian type of view that happens in future London, maybe 100 or so years in the future. And I can only imagine that 100 years from now, because of artificial intelligence, it's just going to be crazy.
Yeah, I was just going to try and talk to you a little bit about artificial intelligence, because it seems like that's in the news right now. I read one article last week about an artificial. They gave an impossible task to an AI to complete, and they found that the AI was lying to that they were lying about the results, because the results were, you have to achieve this, and they knew it was unachievable. And they also found that AI, knowing he or she or it was going to get shut down, was starting to replicate themselves and put themselves someplace else, because they knew that what was going to happen was they were going to get shut down. I'm like, this is now. Well,
that's very interesting. And all these movies make you think that they know, that they're thinking, that they are conscious, that they can write a code, like in the movie Humans, a very interesting series called Humans. They were able to write a code and upload consciousness. Or in the series Upload, they can take, at some point when you die, they can just upload your consciousness
into heaven
into a machine. It's like, well, okay, how do you? That's super fun to read and to listen to. But as I was saying earlier, My novels take a dualist approach of the soul. The soul can exist separate of the body, but once the soul leaves the body is not a body. I believe that it is a corpse, right? So it takes the two to tango, and you cannot take the soul and do. In my book, I explore some creative options, let's say. All right. There is in the Jewish concept, the Shiva or the Shiva period of 10 days where the soul sort of lingers, and things that are said or done can affect the soul. I touch on some of those things. I touch on the ability of PSYCHONIX to do what I make up a lot of words in this book that I tried to explain, like psychomorphism, right? So that the PSYCHONIX, the psychological bionics that is in the person, or part of the person, which can be now in the second book, can be in contact lenses or in an eye or in an earring or under the skin or however, wherever we want to put it, can stay with the body and automate the body while the soul explores, almost like a scout.
So an out-of-body experience kind of thing.
It can have an out-of-body experience for a certain period of time, but God is ultimately allowing it. It can do things. If the soul is out of the body for, say, 10 days, it goes to heaven.
So maybe, what are our
wherever it goes.
You've got a protagonist's journey, obviously, in a story thread. What are the conflicts that our protagonist is going to run into?
Well, the first conflicts that he runs into the first novel are his mental health issues, and if in the book, I give some credit to NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. They provide advocacy, education, support, public awareness, so that all individuals and families affected by mental illness can build better lives. So I wanted to make people aware of some of the struggles that a military guy has with PTSD, right? So that's a struggle. That's an antagonistic internal fight that our soldiers, our airmen, our sailors have. He goes up against that, and I'm trying to think of what else happens in the book. It's some of the people that don't believe what they're saying, that are debating what they're saying publicly and in the lab. Those are some of the fights that they go up against. Stephen Scott's daughter is in the Air Force and she's deployed, and something dreadful happens to her that I'm not going to tell you about. And he goes through various kinds of mental struggles, but he holds on to his hope. He holds on. They hold on to the mental ability, his hope in life, the hope of heaven, the hope of the future, and their discovery of this ability and how ultimately to use it as they go into the second novel and into the third novel. To my mind, the first novel is very exciting. It gives you the background of who Stephen Scott is, his childhood, how he got his abilities, how the company was formed for the second novel. The second novel is full-blown Vince Flynn, Lee Child. You're going to wince at some of the fights. So if you don't like movies like Terminal List or Reacher, or like Rambo: First Blood, you probably don't want to read it. Or when you get to the fight scenes,
skip.
Or someone being shot, you might want to skip, because there's no Christian version of having a knife thrust up through your chin. It just happens. So it's, and that's, I think if you did a word search in my book about the word reality, you'll probably find the word reality comes up a lot. So I don't, in my book, I don't hold back. I don't fake reality. I don't try to gloss over Christianity. I don't try to gloss over atheism. I don't try to gloss over anything. I just express it the way I believe it is, and the way that I don't always try to defend in the book, but I think I'm not a debater. But if you want to go and debate, William Lane Craig or Greg Koukl or Mary Jo Sharp or Mike Licona or Gary Habermas or J.P. Moreland, you're going to lose.
Are you making it possible for individuals to become superheroes?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because I explore the superhero aspect is an interesting way of saying that, because when I start to do my research, I think about where did the whole superhero idea come from, right? Like we were just talking about the mind-to-mind communication of the ancient Hebrews, all the way up through mythology. There are. I'm going to post this stuff later, so folks can look at it. But all the mythological characters that supposedly had mind-to-mind communication abilities, and how many of the Marvel characters that we see in the comic books and on cartoons were drawn by many abilities that were taken from early documents and mythology, right? And through science fiction that's been written for more than 100 years, maybe a couple hundred years. So for someone to say that I took something from Stranger Things, is just absurd. That stuck with me, because someone read, like I said earlier, someone read my book and said, you got that. They used the word, and I didn't know this, like I'm telling you, because I made up that portmanteau, psychological bionics, PSYCHONIX 5 years ago. But in the movie Stranger Things, they use the word psionics. Psionics. And apparently that was born out of Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever that is. It's a game that I guess I've never played it.
No, I have. Yeah. I don't remember that word, but
even that word came from somewhere else, because scion is an old word, and psych deals with the mind. And so you have people like Stephen King, who in some of his books, people are able to push thoughts, right? Stephen King is an amazing writer. Almost every type of science fiction you read, someone has, as you say, some type of superhero. Even the series Heroes. Have you ever seen that series, Heroes?
Yeah.
So it's mind blowing. But my protagonist has abilities that do evolve. The technology evolves. His abilities evolve, but it evolves around the fact that he has a soul, and he is not his brain. He is his soul, and he has a wonderful brain that was made by God. And he uses his brain, and he uses his soul. And this is maybe deeper than some of your audience wants to hear, but philosophers say that the soul has 5 faculties, right? 5, not parts really, because it all consists in a immaterial way. I think it is the mind, emotion, will, spirit, and senses. So when I say mind, I'm talking about an aspect of my soul. When I say spirit, people say, when you're not reading your Bible, you're going to church, you're not talking to other Christians, you're not feeding the spiritual part of your soul. When you're not educating yourself, you're not feeding the mental part of your soul, the mind. Or when you're not crying or being sensitive to other people, maybe you're ignoring, or maybe you're spending too much time watching Hallmark movies with the emotional aspect and the will. Because I've studied about the soul so much, especially from J.P. Moreland. There's been times when I've been working out and my body wanted to quit, and I started thinking about my soul, and I said, my will is part of my soul, and my will says, body, we're not stopping. Every once in a while, my body will pull a muscle, and when but but
And more and more as we get older, right?
Yeah. But see, your will comes from your soul, not your brain. Your brain exercises it, send messages to your body. It obviously they are simpatico, right? You need both, but it is the soul that uses the brain to communicate to the body, and it is the body that can help develop the mind too, because you can start to develop new habits, or your body will tell you that something is hot, and your soul will go, ah, yes, it is hot, keep the body away from it, keep my car out of that water,
So I
out
had
of that
a
fire.
quick question about your protagonist. It
Yeah,
almost seems to me, knowing you the little bit that I know you, that he would have been your next door neighbor.
he could have been. Well, you know very well that I was in the Air Force for 26 years. I've been deployed 2 times, and I was in Korea. I was in Iraq, in Bashar Valley for a little while, but I was mostly in Afghanistan for a year, flying all over to, Kabul, Kandahar, Camp Leatherneck, all these places that people listening know of. And I hung out with a lot of special forces guys, and what do you call it? Psychological psyops folks when I was deployed. And as you well, Glenn and I were both radio broadcasters for American Forces Radio, so we interviewed and hung out with everybody. Everybody.
Everybody.
I knew Navy SEALs. I knew Green Beret. They were my neighbors. I didn't, I do have a black belt in karate, so I did work out a lot just in case, they would attack. No, I'm kidding. These guys are the best of the best, and you want them on. They're on our team, and most of them in real life are, I guess, what you would call teddy bears. But you know what? When you get into, some of them are. I was deployed with a guy out of Brooklyn who didn't know too many words other than an F word. And I would go out with him any day because he was a good guy and he had my back. And, I did what I could on a daily basis to be salt in life, but I was happy to have him in the convoy with me. So you've got to respect and admire people's abilities, know where they come from and their culture, use your position where you are to influence the people that are around you. Glenn and I have been influences on each other now for, I don't know, 30 years. I've known you at least
30,
from the late 80s.
Yeah, it's got to be almost 40 years. Pretty close. So we'll have known each other 40 years.
Yeah. So you can't know people that long, or even for shorter periods of time, whether it be the cleaning lady at a hotel or in your building or at a gas station or at the grocery store. I was talking to my brother yesterday that I love to go around. I love people. I love to talk to people. I'm a talker by nature because I was a broadcaster for the military. And sometimes I have to be situationally aware to realize that not everybody cares to listen. and there's not a commercial break coming.
So do you expect that people who are atheists are going to be repulsed by this book? Because
No,
yeah,
no, not at all. Not at all. You know what? Atheists are like everyone who has worldviews. Some of them are narrow-minded. Some of them are open-minded. Some of them have thought it through and have come to a conclusion. And they're kind of like me in that they have decided what they believe. But I would say this: I think that whether they know it or not, they still operate on the cultural Christianity basis, right? They've still been influenced by thousands of years of Judeo-Christian ethics and morality in our culture and in our law. And I think most of them know that, and they probably wouldn't want it to change. I think even what's his name? The big debater, the atheist scientist, not Hawkins. It'll come to me later. But there are a number of the atheists out there that speak and debate that I know fully admire and respect the Christian thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if nothing else, I think that is a win for the Christian community, in that we have a place on the stage, right? We come from a rich history of thinkers through history, from Thomas Aquinas on. The Christian thinking was primarily responsible for modern scientific push in Europe. Christian thinkers have influenced our world in ways in art and music and culture that we can't deny. So if nothing else, I would think that anyone with an ounce of curiosity would wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
At least wonder why, and then have the ability. Everyone has different abilities, but to assess it like a doctor, it's like, okay, why is Christianity, and I don't want to get into it here, but why is Christianity superior to Buddhism? Now, if you want to hear an interesting testimony, listen to Gary Habermas on YouTube, expert in the resurrection of Jesus and in near-death experiences. But he will tell you that he came that close. One of the smartest men I know, he came that close to being a Buddhist. Why? Well, not everything in Buddhism or in Mormonism or in Judaism or Wicca, or not everything that they believe is bad. It's just not. They have lots of good aspects to them. However, you have to be smart enough to weigh and go, well, what really makes sense of reality more than the other? Almost like a doctor kind of figures out what's wrong with you inside. And there's going to be, you might start out believing that the world is flat, but you may end up gaining evidence that proves to you the world is round. It changes your worldview, right? And
that's what you're kind of hoping is going to happen.
That's the way it happens, Glenn.
Yeah.
That's the way it happens. You get into entertainment, education, the institutions. That's where change occurs. People to person, educating people through shows like this, through writing books, through music, through whatever it is you do. And because I will guarantee you that the people that have been abused by Christians or Christian thinking, or don't have a warped understanding of what Christianity is about, and there's some just won't come around because they've been abused by Christians or so-called Christians. And I, quite frankly, I don't blame them. You have to do a lot of self-reflection. You have to come to the point where you say, you know what is the truth? Regardless of how Glenn behaves or treats me or whatever he does, when I'm sitting alone, what is the truth? And something that I learned a long time ago is that the truth is the truth, regardless of the consequences, regardless of what's going on around you. North is north, south is south. And just because Glenn called me a name, let's just go with that, a name, it doesn't change north being north. It doesn't change the truth of Christianity. And it doesn't change the evidences. So I guess that's the best we can do is go, Mike Licona, I think he's a strong Christian, and go, he was asked one time, if you put a percentage on your belief, what would it be? He said, well, I think he said, correct me, Mike, in this, in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think you said 85%. How strong is your belief? 85%. Doggone, Glenn, if you believe anything 85%, certainty doesn't mean 100%.
Right.
Read what J.P. Moreland says about certainty. I won't go into that either. I'm just sending people to various sources. J.P. Moreland talks about certainty. Certainty doesn't require 100% knowledge. We don't operate on 100% knowledge, because right now you and I could be in a matrix. We could be being prodded to say this and to think this and to do this. So we can't be certain that that's not happening, but I'm quite certain it's not happening, based on common sense and the evidence that I do have of the universe, of science, of theology, of the evidence that's been presented by God in documents that he gave us, and archaeology. Everything that's around me says it's true.
So I know that you said earlier this is the part of a trilogy. When can we expect book 2 to drop?
When the publisher says.
So it's in the can?
Yeah, well, okay. So I will say this is the first one, PSYCHONIX, Mind Over Matter, and it's out. It's on Amazon.com right now. You can get it in Kindle, you can get it in the paperback version, and you can get it in hardcover. Get a copy, give one to your mother.
So I got to ask you, you do voice work.
Yes.
Let me
get there.
Okay.
First, let me tell you when the others will drop.
Okay.
The second one will likely drop in the late spring or in the summer. That was the first discussion with Dr. Gentry at Illative House Press. So be looking and listening. And I would like to have the third dystopian PSYCHONIX Utopia version out before next Christmas. But I hope that you'll go on this journey with me and start now and get excited about this, because this will give you all the background that you need about what's happening. And they asked me, since I am a broadcaster by nature, I think I announced my own birth. And next, I'm sorry, but here comes Mike
weighing in at 14 pounds 1 ounce. By a nose.
Yeah, I think you overestimated my weight by about double, but yeah. So I am going to have that discussion with Illative House Press in upcoming weeks. I'm already set up behind me here to start working on an audiobook, and that is important to me. There's some people that just aren't readers, or they're traveling and they like to hear it. But more importantly to me is I have a family member who is blind, and I have an aunt who is losing her vision, and I would like them to be able to hear my book. And we have a number of people in the communities that would enjoy the audio version, I'm sure. So be looking for that.
It's an enormous undertaking, though, isn't it?
It is. So I hope that I'm enormously remunerated.
Yes. 14 cents an hour by the time you're all done.
Yeah, 14 cents. Yeah. Well, Illative House Press is a new and upcoming publishing company, and I know they're going to do great things. They're starting out, and I wanted to be there on the launching pad with them. Dr. Gentry was, by the way, he was an Army chaplain.
Oh, no kidding. Is that where you met him? Was it, or did you just come across him that way?
No. Actually, I was identified by Dr. Brian Chilton. And these guys are all theologians, teachers who work. Some of them work in hospitals as chaplains, do various work like that, preach and teach, write books, that type of thing. And he recommended me to Illative House Press. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I want to do that. Anyone who's tried to write a book knows that they've gotten a lot of slips going, thank you, but no. You can, even Stephen King said he could wallpaper his house with
rejections.
And you know what? So I believe this is the right time, the right place. God opened the door. People with the right attitude. And Kevin Harris of Reasonable Faith, he's the host of reasonablefaith.com. I wish I had a Kevin Harris voice.
He does have a great voice, doesn't he?
Kevin is brilliant. He does production as well. But he gives me a recommendation, an endorsement in the book as well. If you don't mind me doing some bragging, let the others brag for me. Okay. Kevin Harris, he said, I'm enthralled. It should be a movie. The mind-body problem may be the leading philosophical issue of all time. Mike Burnett's novel brings it to life with intensity. It's an exciting, accurate, and even nostalgic story. Gary Habermas said, PSYCHONIX is a compulsively readable roller coaster ride fraught with psychological thrills, unanticipated dips and lurches, and replete with existential truths. This neo-apologetics whirlwind has the making to fascinate you philosophically, psychologically, and nostalgically. I can't say the word. I can write better. In equal measures. J.P. Moreland said, believe me when I say PSYCHONIX is very interesting reading. I was engaged. Mike Burnette has done an outstanding job of capturing the mind-body problem arguments accurately and in an interesting, readable way. And that's the challenge with these tough issues. And that when the first self-published book that I gave to you and gave to family members, I was just trying to prove how smart I was. But I ultimately realized I wasn't that smart, and I needed to write some words that I understood better, and chew down some of the words so that they were more fun to read, and you didn't have to. Now, I'm not going to say that you might not need to keep a dictionary close by. I do that all the time. I think that's great self-education. And by the way, I have a PhD in autodidactics. You never asked me about that.
No, I didn't. I didn't know you had a PhD
in autodidactics.
What is autodidactics?
Self-learning. So hey, that's a good one to throw around, right? Just what are you? I'm a PhD in autodidactics. Yeah. Some people won't question you.
Yep, they won't. No. Self-learning.
And that's a good thing if you're a self-learner. You always learn from a good book. And
that's what you learn from a good book. Yeah.
You always learn. You learn a lot in mine.
So what advice do you have for writers who want to tackle this is not a little undertaking, the tackling that you did, blending faith, looking at atheism, doing a science fiction near future look at our lives. What do you say to other writers?
That's tough. It's kind of like, what does a painter or a musician say to other painters and musicians? What's in your heart? What's in your mind? What when you sit down to draw or to write or to say something to another person, what are you passionate about? When you finish this show, Glenn, what are you going to be, or when you go to sleep at night or when you're having free time, what fascinates you? I think that's the first hook. What fascinates you? Obviously, I think your Christianity, your belief in God and knowing God and glorifying God should fascinate you, but he gives you passions. Michelangelo could see the David in the stone,
that stone,
in the stone. And his comments were that I'm just going to release him. Right. So I think it's something that God puts in you, but it's also something that needs to be practiced. I think my son and I talk about this all the time because he's a writer too. It's like, you've got to know the rules. Start off trying to know the rules. And then if you're like me, you'll go about breaking them. Right. And then trust all the people around you who give you advice. I've had some people that have been honest, who have given me good notes for my book that I credit in all my books. The first book has like 2 pages of credits to people who read my book and gave me feedback. The second book, I've already got 2 PhDs and a teacher, I won't mention her yet, down in Austin, Texas, who is an expert in transhumanism, who just read my book and gave me an endorsement for the second book. So that means a lot when people that are experts in the field, like Gary Habermas or J.P. Moreland, Leo Purser, um, Joshua Ferris in the second book. I probably shouldn't mention everybody, but he's been on our program here. These people are experts in the study of the mind-body problem, the soul, identity, that type of thing. Stuff that is tough reading if you read the academic books. And there you go, because there's a lot of people who won't pick up a Bible or pick up a theology book or pick up an academic book about these subjects, but I do. I love reading them, but then I like to think creatively, like, what does that really, like what William Lane Craig said about God's omnipresence, being cognitively aware but locally active. That was mind-blowing. It's like, what does that mean? That God can know, because he's the ultimate mind, that he can know what's in my mind. It's not like he's physically everywhere, because he's not a physical being, but he can mentally know what's going on and influence my life and influence holding the world together. And then you take that seed and go, what can people do with that? You know, what could a scientist, a neurologist in a lab discover? Kind of like, who was it? Alexander Graham Bell. He's like, Watson, come here. So in this book, Dr. Mark Starr has his Watson, come here moment on the discovery of something new.
So that might be a great place to leave it off. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had asked you about your book?
No, I think, gosh, I don't think so. This is, I've tried to take a lot of complicated subjects and boil them down into entertainment subjects. So it's like infotainment, but not, I think when I did my rewrite, I think people could tell I was trying too hard. I was trying to express my Christian views in a way that was more like an old Christian tract that you would hand out. And I thought, you know what? There's a place for everybody and everything. If God calls you to do something in a certain way, I don't poo-poo that. But I wanted it to be something that even if you did not believe what I believe, you would still be entertained by the thoughts.
Cool.
So, and I would ask you please to ask your friends and neighbors to pick up a copy. This is from Illicit House Press. It's PSYCHONIX Mind Over Matter. It's reasonably priced. I think Kindle's is around 10. The other book is around 50. The paperback is around 15, and the hardcover is around 20 or so. I'm not sure exactly, but
available on Amazon, I know, because that's where I got one.
Yeah, just look at Amazon.com and get the next version, Glenn, and read it and tell me if you think it's better.
Okay.
And if you do that, it would be helpful, because as a new writer, as someone trying to get started, there's not a big marketing budget for this type of thing. So I rely on friends and family and prayer. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time today chatting about your first book. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time on The Real Squabble.